Of all of Norman Lear's All in the Family spinoffs, The Jeffersons was arguably one of the most successful. Our good friend George Jefferson was the African-American counterpart to Archie Bunker in many ways. Both characters were boisterous and full of opinions. To say that they were both stuck in their ways is a bit of an understatement. Regardless of their backward views and bigotry, there's an undercurrent of humanity and family values that elevates them above their misguided ways and ingrains them in our hearts in a very endearing way. The Jeffersons follows the story of George's fledgling dry cleaning business and the spontaneous financial success grown out of it. No longer impoverished, he moves his family to the big city. Once they found their way to the deluxe apartment in the sky, the Jefferson family grows and develops right before our eyes. George's wife, Louise, provides the counterbalance to George's loudmouth, showy antics. Through the help of his wife and his witty, level-headed son, Lionel, George's heart softens throughout the show's impressive 11-season run. Enemies become friends, viewpoints change, and a broad range of topical themes are discussed and wrestled with much in the same way as Lear's other shows like Maude and Sanford and Son. Norman had a masterful way of touching on controversial subject material and advancing the cultural conversation of the era for the benefit of societal advancement. So let's take a look at how the Jeffersons challenged the status quo and made history. Stick around until the end of the video to find out how the show unceremoniously ended without warning. Facts Verse presents The Jeffersons Cast Made History. Before we get started, make sure you hit like and subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to tap the bell icon to turn on notifications. Lionel was the first Jefferson to hit the TV screen. All in the Family foreshadowed the Jeffersons heavily by mentioning the family as being nearby neighbors right from the get-go. In fact, Lionel Jefferson appears in the very first episode of Season 1. His mom, Louise, would show up later on the same season. It would still be several seasons before Sherman Hemsley makes his first appearance. Sherman was once a mailman. Long before he found success on the TV screen, Sherman Hemsley worked as a postal worker in Pennsylvania. He continued that career path even after moving to New York City to chase his dream of being on stage and on screen. Even while he was on Broadway, he was still working at a local post office to support himself. Guess he really did move on up. Speaking of making moves, did you ever hit like and subscribe to our channel? Franklin Cover, aka Tom Willis, took public transit to work. There certainly wasn't a lot of pretentious extravagance amidst the Jeffersons cast. Sherman was a postal man, and Franklin Cover took a public bus to the TV studio on a daily basis. He refused to buy a car and rented a modest apartment in Hollywood while the show was in production. His permanent home was in New York. George Jefferson and Lionel were actually closer in age than you'd think. Yep, Sherman Hemsley was in fact only 11 years the senior of Mike Evans, the actor who played his son Lionel. Despite the relatively tiny age gap, they embodied their roles and on-screen relationship quite well. Isabel Sanford made TV history for her role as Louise. In 1981, she became the first black woman to take home an Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series. In fact, she was the second African-American actress to win an Emmy in general. She was an outstanding actress that deserved every bit of recognition she received. Sadly, she would pass away at the age of 86 in 2004. George Clooney guest starred in a Jeffersons spinoff called ER. CBS briefly tried out a show in the 84-85 season called ER that was a pseudo-spinoff of The Jeffersons. The show starred Lynn Moody, who played Julie Williams, a New York City nurse who just so happened to be the niece of George and Louise. The show didn't really catch on, and the other ER TV show you're probably more familiar with would be the more memorable one. But in 1985, a young George Clooney would make an appearance on the show. The Jeffersons was the first TV sitcom to feature a transgender character. Norman Lear's shows routinely broke boundaries and pushed the envelope of what was acceptable subject material for the day. Lear was a social advocate and used his shows as a vehicle for progressive social and political change. In 1977, on an episode called Once a Friend, Florence takes down a message from an Edie Stokes, letting George know they are in town for the evening. George assumes that it was merely a typo and that Edie was actually Eddie, his old Navy buddy. Turns out they are one and the same. Edie, formerly Eddie, is transgendered and has recently gone through with her sexual reassignment surgery. George is shocked and disturbed by the transition and makes a fool of himself. Louise gets suspicious and calls the hotel to see who Edie is. She soon thinks her husband is cheating on her. Shenanigans ensue and lessons are learned. Mike Evans would leave the show to work on Good Times. Best known for being the original Lionel before his brother Damon Evans swooped in to fill the part in his absence, Mike Evans would take a break from the Jeffersons to co-create and write Good Times, another sitcom spinoff of All in the Family. Janae Dubois from Good Times sang the iconic Jeffersons theme song. It's not difficult to see how there's a tremendous amount of overlap between all of Norman Lear's shows. Good Times, which he was executive producer for, starred Dubois as Willona Woods. She would not only gain fame from the show, but she would also sing the infectious Movin' On Up theme song for the Jeffersons. We think she did a great job. It's a little odd they used an actress from a different show to sing the song. Guess Louise wasn't much of a singer, but I bet Florence could have belted it out. Roxy Roker is the mother of Lenny Kravitz. Well, since we're talking about music and such, this is probably a good time to note that Roxy Roker, who played Helen Willis, is the mother of none other than Lenny Kravitz. Little Lenny was born in 1964. His father was former ABC News editor Cy Kravitz. Lenny discusses in interviews later on how he was always afraid of his father, but it was his mother who was always a beacon of love and support. Who knew he would go on to win Grammy after Grammy, 4 in total to be precise, and find the success that few could ever dream of. You can go visit the Real World apartment building. If you're ever walking the streets of Manhattan and want to check out the backdrop for the Jeffersons apartment building, go visit a complex called Park Lane Towers in the Upper East Side. It was built in the 1960s and is rather iconic for its towering height and identifiable round balconies. The Jeffersons would make cameo appearances on other hit shows. Even after the show wrapped up suddenly in 1985, which we'll touch on shortly, that wasn't the last we would see of George and Louise. In fact, in the series finale of Will Smith's classic sitcom, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the family would make a surprise reprisal of their roles as the new tenants who bought the bank's posh mansion. In 2011, Sherman Hemsley would reprise his role once more for Tyler Perry's House of Pain in an episode entitled Curtis Jefferson, which would involve a dream sequence where Curtis is in his favorite TV show, The Jeffersons, to learn a vital lesson. The episode was significant too for being a sort of ceremonial passing of the torch to House of Pain, which would continue on to be the longest-running African-American situational comedy. It also served as a bit of a tribute for Sherman Hemsley, who would pass away a little under a year later. There was no real end of the show. Instead of giving the show a fitting finale, it was suddenly canceled rather abruptly. Sherman only learned of the show's cancellation by reading it in the newspaper. It's a shame the show didn't receive the respectful goodbye it deserved. The last episode would be entitled Red Robins and would involve Mr. Jefferson becoming a Girl Scout troop leader. Well, that wraps up our look at The Jeffersons, a show that paved the way for progress and grabbed a hold of our hearts and never let go. Even today, it still packs the same comedic punch as it did throughout the 70s and 80s. Now we want to hear from you. Who was your favorite Jefferson? Are you a George fan with all of his backward gruffness, or are you a fan of his level-headed son Lionel? Let us know in the comments what you think. Before you head out, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel. To make sure you never miss another one of our videos, tap the bell icon to turn on notifications.